Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Crumb Bum Deluxe. Today, I'm going to review, non-spoiler review of the Mandalorian and Grogu Star Wars film that just dropped. I just got back from a screening of it, and I wanted to share my thoughts. I won't spoil anything, but in the latter part of the video, I will kind of go in depth a little bit on some of what I think is going on with this film and kind of in films in general, in a way, but we'll get there. So anyway, first and foremost, I just want to say it's good. It is a good film. It's a fun film. It's what it does right. It does really well and is actually great. I will also add bold statement that it is probably one of the best Star Wars films ever made. Okay, boom, shots fired. But that being said, without going into spoilers, I don't think it has much of an emotional story to tell other than kind of the basics or the broad strokes, which are still good, which still works. It's very satisfactory in terms of like kind of the story arc that happens during the film, throughout the film. That being said, I think what it does do well is it is kind of capturing that notion of it being like a pulp episode in a sci-fi novel, dime store novels from Lucas days, so I think it really has that sense of it being like an adventure. One thing I think is interesting about the way that they approached this was they decided not to have it adhere itself to the greater lore in any capacity. It's not building towards something new on the horizon necessarily, and it's not connecting itself canonically, or at least not dogmatically, to the canon. It's its own thing. It's having its own fun. It's doing its own thing. For fans of the TV show, we already know the history of Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, and Grogu. We already know those things, and however you feel about those seasons, the first couple were pretty good. I think the third one kind of lost a lot of people, and the Boba Fett show. But I think what's been happening is, now that Dave Filoni, who came from the animated side of Star Wars, has come to the forefront as the chief creative officer of Lucasfilm, is done it well. He's done things in a way that is kind of like correcting the course of Star Wars that I think even fans of the original films might still be feeling, even about the prequels. The prequels were very divisive when they came out, and I think I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but I think that this film decides to stay in its own lane and do its own thing, and I think that works to its benefit throughout the film and actually is what makes it great. I think not being tied to the Skywalker saga or even being tied to Ahsoka or some of the Rebels, some of the other lore that's been established in the television series, you don't need to know all that stuff to jump in and enjoy this film and really be taken for a ride. And I think probably one of the most impressive aspects of the film overall were the special effects. And I think, I think that's even an interesting statement this day and age because, I think we're in an age where special effects have advanced so much that we kind of maybe take it for granted what's being done behind the scenes to craft these films, because for a long time it's just been computer generated imagery that has done the majority of the heavy lifting for cinematic special effects. Which is still the case here, but I think, and I'm going to say another bold statement, I think this film in particular is a bit of a turning point. Now, I may be wrong, but what I see happening with the special effects in this film is a really masterful mix of practical and non-practical effects. They have that stagecraft, that giant wraparound LED screen that they can project whatever world behind the actors and characters, and in the practical effects realm, all the puppetry and animatronics that you see throughout the film, the whole thing is woven masterfully together. What I also think is going on with these special effects here is I may be wrong about this, but we know for Avengers Doomsday, they're talking about how a lot of the special effects are going to be AI driven. I forget what executive divulged that information, but that's what we're kind of hearing about the Avengers Doomsday special effects. But I think we're seeing some of that happen right here. I'm going to go as far as to say that I think this is the best special effects I've ever seen in a film ever. The amount of detail in each of the creatures, the design of all the creatures and the set pieces and the backgrounds, it's like we're at a moment in technology where all this stuff is really coming together very tightly. But I also do think that AI is involved somewhere, because some of the fidelity of these images, the believability of these creatures and machines and settings feeling like a real world, I think are at this point to a masterful degree. This film is one in a long time where I really feel like the special effects were just like the most peak they can be at this time. And I think moving forward, movies, whether or not they end up being better or worse going on into the future, which I think we're actually starting to see kind of things pick up from some of the things that have kept films in kind of a purgatory, it seems like, in terms of cinema. But things are changing. That's just how it is. But I think going forward with movies like this in the genre space, you're gonna have extremely astounding visuals like nothing we've seen before. And when I was watching this film, I'm not trying to overhype it or anything like that, and again, I could be wrong. It could just all be like traditional CG, but something's different here. Something is different with this film, and the way I took the visuals, I was astounded. Not since like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes have I felt this way about the special effects, or a more recent one, which is not a very good movie, but Transformers Rise of the Beasts had incredible special effects. The CG in that, whatever they did, was amazing. But Mandalorian and Grogu, that was the thing that stood out to me the most. The performances are actually really great. You can tell there's some recognizable voices and then other faces you've seen throughout Star Wars. There's a lot of action, a lot of set pieces, really good stuff, really fun and impressive action sequences. I'm excited. I was one of the haters, man. I was not on board with this. I was like, Mandalorian's done. I was kind of writing it off. And I'm glad to be wrong here. I'm really glad to be wrong, because this movie was so much fun. Throughout I questioned, does it need to have, such a consequential, emotional story at its core in order for it to be meaningful or good? And I think not. It's always great when we get something that is canonically important, like, but they botched the sequel trilogy, and those were the big canonical tent poles. So this movie doesn't do that. This movie is not trying to push the franchise forward canonically in its mythology. However, I do believe it's pushing it forward in the same way that Andor is. I think it's time that people are interested in the wars of the stars, like they're interested to see what more of Star Wars has to offer. And this has been a long time coming, through a lot of growing pains if you're a Star Wars fan, but I think we're getting there. I think we're getting there under the leadership of guys like Favreau and Dave Filoni. And this is like an institutional community. Anybody who's a part of Star Wars, Freddie Prinze Jr., Rosario Dawson, Timothy Oliphant, Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen, like you name it, anybody who's a part of this family, it's a very sacred thing to them. And I only know that as a fan from things I see online and interviews, especially look at some of Freddie Prinze's stuff, some Sam Witwer, who plays Maul. If you haven't seen Maul, it's an excellent, fantastic show. Watch Maul. But right now, Star Wars, I think, is coming back into its own, and I think it takes the bravery to jump out of what is expected and deliver things that make the universe richer without needing the crutch of like the Skywalker saga. Even right now, I think people have kind of stepped away from the Jedi. I think we've examined as much as we can about the Jedi for now. And, I'm a big Jedi guy. I miss seeing lightsabers and stuff on screen. Again, watch Maul. It's incredible. But, again, it's still there. That stuff is still there for the fans. But I think what's more important now for the films and television realm of Star Wars is to do your own thing. The music in this film is daring. It's Star Wars music, but it does its own thing. Ludwig Göransson, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is, a genius. Everybody knows this. He's the hottest thing in the industry right now in terms of music, and he just knocks it out of the park with this one. It has so much attitude. It has so many daring moments that you don't expect from a Star Wars film, but they go there, and they, I think part of what Favreau is thinking too is like, this is our one last shot to really, put some meaning behind this character who I think, the Mandalorian saga kind of lost its way a little bit. I think it started simply, bounty hunter making his way in the galaxy and hunting down, these prominent criminals and an ex-Empire warlords and such. And so, but I think at some point it was where the pitfalls happened were it trying to adhere to the greater mythology. And I still enjoyed season 3, but I think for a lot of people it wasn't about Din Djarin anymore, and because of the financial hurdles that they face, having Pedro Pascal in the helmet, not in the helmet, all that bullshit. And I'm gonna say it's bullshit. That helmet on all the time, that is bullshit. That is dumb. It's just a money thing. They wrote it into the canon. It's stupid. Pedro Pascal, it'd be great if we could have him in every frame, but he's just too expensive. And it's stupid. So, Mandalorian shouldn't have to adhere to that. It's just a money thing. Anyway, that's my gripe. But that final season kind of ended up becoming more about the race of Mandalorians. The title, The Mandalorian, had a greater meaning. And that's interesting. I think they explored some interesting territory, but I also think they kind of lost sight of Din Djarin and Grogu, for that matter. I have also been a Grogu hater for a long time, just like too cute. It's that signpost that Disney has put up just to milk as much cutesy, corny bullshit. You know what I mean? It's that corny, dumb shit that your run-of-the-mill mainstream audiences just eat up. And I feel like that's another gripe that a lot of Star Wars fans have, especially under the hands of Disney, is that it's just too cutesy. Even our Predators have, doe-eyed, cute little critters in them these days. So, I think that is something that's important. It's great to have lots of things for the kids, obviously, but we're as adults also fans of science fiction and fantasy, and there are times I can't help but to think that we deserve better. So anyway, all that being said, I think The Mandalorian and Grogu kind of is a step in a great direction. Whether it's the right direction or not, I don't know. It kind of feels that way. But I think under the guidance of Filoni, who I think is probably the biggest Star Wars fan in the world, and I've enjoyed his work for years now in the animated series. If you have not watched through those, go watch them. Clone Wars is incredible. If you have kids, it's a great thing to watch with your kids, I'm sure. If you don't have kids, go online and look up the non-filler episode guides where they kind of cut out all the cutesy side episodes and just kind of stick to the meat of the lore. Right now I've been really big into Star Wars after Maul, again, mentioning that, really incredible. I've been going back and watching through it and kind of re-examining my fandom, where it's at, where it could go. And I was skeptical on Mandalorian and Grogu, but it really does deliver, and I hope, they're projecting the first weekend box office not to be so great, and I can tell you for certain it's better than Solo. It's better than the entirety of the sequel trilogy, and it's better than The Phantom Menace. Honestly, it's probably, so I like to rank Empire Strikes Back is the quintessential, in my opinion, best Star Wars movie there is. Rogue One, probably the greatest Star Wars film next to that. I don't know what else to say about that one. Rogue One's incredible. The remainder of the original trilogy, and Mandalorian and Grogu, and then the prequels, Clone Wars, all that. So I don't know if I've said all what I need to say about it. It's good. If you've made it this far, give me a like, give me a subscribe, help a homie out. Also, if you've made it this far, go see it. It's really good. You will enjoy it. And we need more Star Wars like this. You know, we need more Star Wars that people can have fun with, as well as the stuff that is more canonically consequential and driving the franchise forward in its pivotal broad strokes. But this is an adventure in a galaxy far, far away that you and I both love dearly. And in that regard, to the fandom, I think, you know, it's a wonderful gift. So anyway, that's my take on Mandalorian and Grogu. I hope you enjoy it at the movies. We'll probably be back. Next review will be Masters of the Universe, the new He-Man, so I'm interested to see how that all plays out. Kind of skeptical on that one as well, but that's who I am. But I like being wrong. On this one, I was wrong. Happy to admit it, and we'll see you next time.